Hey guys, tonight we're checking into one of the most gloriously miserable institutions in American history, the Frontier Boarding House. Not the cozy, candlelit, wholesome version your brain has assembled from 100 westerns, not the place with gingham curtains and a kindly widow setting out pie, but the actual version, the one that smelled like wet boots and ambition and probably typhoid, not the wide-open sky romance, not the rugged but charming frontier spirit. 40 men, one wash basin, and a mattress stuffed with something that is definitely moving. If grim, oddly soothing history is your kind of bedtime listening, hit the like button and subscribe, only if you genuinely enjoy drifting off to mildly disturbing, deeply factual history. Special shout out to the listener who suggested this one. You know who you are, and I hope you're sleeping somewhere with your own pillow. Drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Wherever you are, it's probably about 4 a.m., somewhere on this map. Statistically, at least one of you is lying in a bed right now feeling very grateful it doesn't have a shift partner. Settle in, kill the overhead light, and ease the covers up around your shoulders, maybe a touch closer to your chin than usual, just in case you start thinking about the corn husk mattress situation. Have you ever wondered what the American frontier actually smelled like at 6 in the morning before you'd eaten anything? What it meant to rent a bed slot rather than a bed? And whether the distinction made you feel better or worse about the transaction? Who exactly was sleeping in that sheet before you, how recently they left, and whether you were expected to care? Could you survive a menu so monotonous it caused a vitamin deficiency that nobody had a name for yet? What happened to the canned goods, and why did the label not mention the lead solder? Did anyone bathe, and if so, at what cost? And was it worth 4 hours of your wages to be briefly less terrible? And seriously, where did 40 men and one outhouse think this arrangement was going? Congratulations, you've just woken up in Virginia City, Nevada, 1862. The sheet beneath you is still warm from the man who just left for his shift. The mattress is moving slightly, and not because of you. Good luck. You walk in at 9:30 in the evening, and the proprietress, a woman who runs a 40-foot by 20-foot establishment on the edge of a Nevada silver camp, he is standing behind a small wooden counter that used to be a packing crate. You pay her 50 cents in coin. She does not give you a key. She does not give you a room. She gives you a slot, which is a position in a bed, a place in a rotation, and a piece of furniture you will share with 2 men you have not yet met, and 1 man who is currently still in it. The bed is a wooden frame with a straw mattress and 2 blankets that have been washed approximately as many times as you'd expect. The sheets are grey, not from infrequent washing, but from the weight of accumulated use, the way something goes grey when enough men have passed through it that colour stops being a useful concept. There's an indent in the centre pillow from the head of the night shift miner who left an hour ago. The indent is still warm. You settle into it like a man who has decided not to think too hard about what he's decided. This is hot-bunking. The bed doesn't rest between occupants. The bed is a business. It runs 2 shifts, sometimes 3, and at peak boom periods, Virginia City in the early 1860s, Leadville in the late 1870s, 3 men share a single frame simultaneously, lying head to toe, which is the sleeping arrangement of men who have not yet agreed to terms but are too tired to negotiate. The slot you've purchased is a rental measured in body heat. The previous occupant has not left his socks, but he has left their shape. The proprietress, whose name is something like Clara or Margaret or whatever she told the county assessor, has 40 men sleeping in a space designed for perhaps a quarter of that. She knows every man's shift. She knows every man's smell. She knows who kicks and who snores and who wakes at 3 in the morning convinced someone is stealing from him, which is sometimes true. She runs this operation with the logistics of a railway switchyard and the emotional warmth of a railway switchyard. She is watchful, calm, and quietly unimpressed. That is the whole of her affect. The floor space is not free. At Virginia City, during the worst of the boom, bare planks rented for 50 cents a night, same price as a slot, for none of the mattress. Men use their boots as pillows, which is a repurposing that serves neither object well. A boot is not a pillow. A plank is not a bed. But 50 cents buys what 50 cents buys, and what 50 cents buys is the specific dignity of not sleeping outdoors in October in Nevada. Let's talk about what else 50 cents does not buy. It does not buy privacy. The sleeping room, the kitchen, and the dining area occupy the same 40 by 20-foot rectangle, divided by a curtain that stops at shoulder height and provides the visual impression of separation without any of its substance. The man in the next slot over is 4 inches from your ear. He is breathing with tremendous commitment. The kerosene lamp on the side table is still lit, depositing a thin, oily film on your lungs and the walls equally, neither of which asked for it. A man named Hector, who has the bunk against the far wall, is arranging his boots with the focused attention of someone whose boots are the only things he fully owns. He lines them up parallel. He checks the alignment. He does this every night. Nobody mentions it. You stand at the foot of the bed at 5 minutes past 10, watching the night shift miner roll out of it and pull his boots on without speaking to you. The sheets do not get changed between you. The pillow keeps the dent of his head. You climb in fully clothed, because everyone climbs in fully clothed, and you discover that the mattress is still warm in the specific places where the previous occupant was warmest. This system is called hot-bunking, and the proprietress will not be apologizing for it tonight or any other night. Let's talk about the mattress. It's not a mattress. It's a canvas sack stuffed with whatever was available the day someone needed a canvas sack stuffed. Corn husks, if the establishment is optimistic, dried grass, if it isn't. Wood shavings in leaner operations, horsehair in slightly better ones, and straw in the worst, because straw is the ecosystem preference of the bedbug, who has been here longer than you and intends to stay. The mattress doesn't hold your weight so much as it records your presence and slowly, philosophically, accepts it. The bedbugs are a baseline condition, the same way humidity is a baseline condition in Georgia or poor Wi-Fi is a baseline condition at an airport gate. Head lice, body lice, pubic lice, and fleas are all present and have been for some time, and the men around you treat the itching the way you treat a squeaky floorboard, with mild irritation, then accommodation. The traveller who writes home about the bugs is the traveller who hasn't slept in a mining camp long enough to stop noticing them. Fernando, the man in the bunk to your left, adjusts his jacket over his shoulder like a blanket, pulls his hat down over his eyes, and is asleep before you finish blinking. He has the technique. You don't have the technique yet. The technique is basically the ability to decide with conviction that the warm patch under your left hip is not what you think it is. The wall behind your shoulder ticks once, then again. The frame is green lumber, cut fast and nailed faster because a boarding house that wasn't built in a week wasn't built at all when the camp went from 0 to 8,000 people in the span of a dry summer. Green lumber warps. It warps with dedication and personal investment, pulling away from the next board in a gap wide enough to admit a fist, and from there a draft that moves through the room like something with a purpose. The gaps have been stuffed with rags. Some have been stuffed with newspaper. Neither is reliably where it started by midnight. The cold comes through the cramped, drafty, paper-stuffed wall anyway, which means you're sleeping fully clothed in a warm bed in a freezing room, and those two facts don't resolve each other as much as you'd hope. The kerosene lamp in the corner burns low all night, which is either a comfort or a hazard depending on how the next 3 months go. It deposits a thin, oily film on your lungs and a matching film on the walls, which are already yellowed from the last 3 years of identical lamps burning in the same corner. The light it throws is yellow and unsteady, a slow, sour and faintly oily glow that makes everyone in the room look like they're recovering from something. Most of them are. Outside, a piano is playing somewhere. Badly. It hasn't stopped since you arrived and there's no evidence it intends to. The sound travels through the warped lumber walls without any reduction in confidence, and it will be there when you close your eyes and there when you open them at 4 in the morning to begin the process again. You do not undress for bed. Nobody undresses for bed. Your shirt, your trousers, your suspenders, your woolen union suit, all of it stays on. There are reasons, and the reasons are practical. The room is cold. The sheets are not yours. Your possessions are in your pockets, and your pockets are safer on your body than under a pillow shared by 3 strangers. You lie down, fully dressed, in the position of a man preparing to leave at short notice. Let's talk about the boots. You can't leave them on the floor. The floor is not a safe place for anything you value. Men you've never met pass through this room at intervals the establishment doesn't advertise, collecting whatever isn't bolted down or attached to a human being. So the boots come off and go under your head. Not beside your head. Under it. Your neck knows immediately. You sleep anyway because you are very tired, and because the alternatives are limited. Now, at Virginia City in the early 1860s, This particular arrangement, boots as pillow, bare plank as mattress, ran 50 cents a night. That's floor space only. No bunk, no straw tick, no blanket. Just the floor, which has been walked on by every man currently in this room, plus every man who slept here before them. You're paying for the right to be horizontal indoors. The floor is the host. The floor charges by the foot of body length. The walls, for their part, are doing their best. The newspaper stuffed between the planks held through sundown. Whether it holds through the night is a matter of personal optimism. A man named Chet sleeps against the far wall with his hat pulled over his face, which is either a sleeping strategy or an opinion about the wallpaper. By 3 in the morning, a gap has opened near the baseboard and the wind coming through it is specific and personal, like a message addressed only to you. Your union suit earns its existence. It's heavy wool, scratchy in a way that suggests the sheep had a difficult life, and it keeps in exactly enough heat to make the cold feel like an inconvenience rather than a crisis. You're wearing every layer you own. The man next to you is also wearing every layer he owns. The room smells accordingly, like a working agreement between 4 bodies that have each decided, independently, that bathing at 25 cents a visit is a luxury reserved for special occasions, and that no occasion since arrival has qualified. The bathhouse is 1 block over. It charges 25 to 50 cents per bath, which is 2 to 4 hours of your wages before the company store takes its portion. You've been here 6 weeks. The math hasn't worked out yet. You keep a wet rag near the wash basin for what the boarding house euphemistically calls freshening up, which is less a hygiene practice and more a gesture of goodwill toward the concept. The rag is grey, not from infrequent washing, from infrequent enthusiasm. There's a difference, and it matters less than you'd think. Of course, the real calculus of sleeping fully dressed is simpler than any of this. You sleep dressed because a dressed man can move, a dressed man can run. Fire started in a deadwood kitchen in 1879 and took most of the block before anyone had time to deliberate. The window latch in a second-floor room doesn't always cooperate under pressure. The stairs smoke before they burn. The man who slept in his boots had a meaningful head start. The man who didn't became a cautionary detail nobody wrote down because there were too many of them. You close your eyes. Chet hasn't moved. The piano downstairs is still going, slowly, badly, and without apparent intention of stopping. Your boots are under your head. Your money is in your left sock. The sheets are dented where the last man's shoulders were, and now your shoulders fill the same shape, and somewhere in that fact is something almost comfortable if you don't think about it. You discover, around 11 o'clock, that the bed you have rented is not yours alone. A second man arrives, removes his coat, and lies down beside you. Then a third arrives. 2 of you will lie head to feet. The third will lie crosswise at the foot, with his shoulders against your shins. This is the standard arrangement during boom weeks at the Comstock load, and the proprietress will explain it to you with the patient tone of someone who has explained it many times this season. The sheets are still dented from the previous occupant's head. Not warm, exactly, but not cold either. Somewhere in between a damp, tepid, and faintly inhabited middle ground, which is the worst option. The man beside you smells of sulphur and damp wool, which means he came off the night shift at the lower shaft. The man at your feet has a cough that is definitely just dust, a dry, rattling, hopeful kind of cough, probably dust. You will decide it is dust and try to sleep. Let's talk about the mattress. It's not a mattress. It's a bag of corn husks stuffed into a canvas sleeve and told to be optimistic. Corn husks are cheaper than straw, which matters, though straw at least compresses into something that resembles a surface. The corn husks don't compress, they crinkle. Every time any of the 3 men in this bed shifts position, the mattress issues a sound like someone crumpling a very long legal document. Nobody is sleeping through this. The mattress knows. Below the corn husks, closer to the rope frame, something is also living in the mattress. Several somethings. Bedbugs prefer straw above all else, but they'll make do with corn husks the way a determined guest makes do with the continental breakfast. They are not dramatic about it. You don't feel them immediately. You feel them in the morning, in small red lines across your wrists and ankles, arranged with a geometric tidiness that seems almost deliberate. Head lice, body lice, and the third kind are also present. They are not exceptional, they are ambient. A travelling salesman passing through Goldfield, Nevada in 1893 noted in his diary that he had stopped noticing the lice sometime around Reno, which is either a coping mechanism or a medical condition. The bed rents in 3 shifts across 24 hours. The day shift miner climbs out at 5 in the morning. The swing shift miner is already waiting in the hallway, coat on, boot laces loose and faintly muddy. He lies down before the sheets stop moving. The night shift miner will have his turn after sundown. The bed is never empty. The bed does not know what empty means. A man named Ellis, who operated a boarding house in Leadville for 11 months in 1879 before the silver thinned and the camp reorganized itself, kept a ledger, 31 men, 12 beds, a small back room with 4 more. He charged 40 cents per shift. He cleared the ledger carefully each morning, which was more than the sheets could say. The man at your feet has stopped coughing and started snoring. The man beside you has not moved in 20 minutes, which you have decided to interpret as sleep and not as anything else. The corn husks crinkle once beneath you, settling into their position. The kerosene lamp in the hallway casts a thin yellow stripe under the door and deposits a faint, oily suggestion of itself into the room with every breath you take. Outside, a piano is playing somewhere. Badly. It has been playing since you arrived and it does not appear to have an ending in mind. You look at the rate card on the wall and you realize that 50 cents buys you the bed and 25 buys you a stretch of floor. The floor is bare pine plank. It has knots. It has half-inch gaps where the wood has shrunk in dry weather. The proprietress hands you nothing. No blanket, no mat, no pillow. Your boots will be your pillow, the way your boots are everyone's pillow on the lower rate, and the floor will be where you sleep until the breakfast bell. This is Virginia City, Nevada, early 1860s, which has gone from a flat piece of nothing to 10,000 residents in under a year, and the accommodation market has responded accordingly. The beds are full. The floor is full. There are men sleeping in chairs. A man near the door has arranged himself across 2 flour sacks and a coiled rope in a configuration that suggests either creativity or defeat. It's both. It's definitely both. Let's talk about the boots. They're doing 2 jobs. All day they've been doing the boots job. The walking, the standing, the occasional running, and now you've folded them at the ankle and placed them under your head, where they are performing the pillow job with the bland, professional resentment of an object that has been asked to do 2 things and is keeping a list. The leather is stiff. The laces press into your cheek. By morning there's an imprint on your face that tells the story of your choices. A man named Clyde, 2 bodies to your left, has wedged his hat under his ear instead. He considers this a refinement. He adjusts it every 15 minutes throughout the night. You know this because you can hear him. The floor itself is not neutral. It has opinions, flat, hard, and quietly resentful ones. The gaps let in cold air from below in winter, and in summer the same gaps let up a smell from under the building that the floor clearly considers someone else's problem. The planks shift when anyone turns over. The knots are raised, slightly, exactly where your hip lands. You move. There's another knot. The floor has thought this through. Wall insulation in a place like this is rags and newspaper, stuffed into gaps that the green lumber opened when it warped. The newspaper is from 3 months ago and 3 states away. By morning, the wind has worked some of it loose. The rags hold better, but not much. Around 2 in the morning, a draft arrives through the east wall with the confidence of someone who lives here. It does not knock. The kerosene lamp on the shelf burns low all night because somebody's paid a small extra fee to keep it going. It casts a yellow, unsteady light across the ceiling and deposits a thin, oily film on everything it touches, the walls, the shelf, the sleeping men, your lungs. You breathe it in. It's not dramatic. It's just the texture of air in here, the same way a certain kind of ambient hum is just the texture of air near a highway. You stop noticing it. This is either adaptation or damage. Probably both. Outside, something is happening with a piano. It has been happening with a piano since before you arrived, and it will continue happening with a piano until a time that has not yet been determined. The piano is simply present, the way weather is present, and the man playing it has the commitment of someone who has nowhere else to be, which in Virginia City in 1862 is everyone. You close your eyes. The boot shifts. The draft returns. The piano continues its opinion on the matter. 25 cents. This is what the night costs. You feel the first one at 15:15 midnight, then the second. Then you stop counting, because counting is not a useful activity once the number has passed roughly 6. Cymex lectularius is the formal name for the bedbug, and Cymex lectularius lives in the straw of your mattress in numbers that travelers' diaries describe not as a complaint but as the weather. You will not get rid of them tonight. You will only manage them, which is the local term for a different kind of relationship. Let's talk about the mattress. It's not a mattress. It's a straw-stuffed canvas sack that functions as both a sleeping surface and a small ecosystem. Corn husks, dried grass, wood shavings, horsehair, any of these would have been a modest improvement. You got straw. Straw is the worst for infestation, a fact the entire frontier west has arrived at independently and then collectively decided to do nothing about. The straw has been here longer than you. It will be here after you leave. It has opinions, small, persistent, and reliably hungry ones, and those opinions are biting. The bedbugs aren't alone. Head lice and body lice arrive as a package deal. The mattress charges them no rent and asks no questions, and they have, in their way, decided this is home. Pubic lice are technically separate, but the mattress doesn't observe those distinctions. Travellers writing home in the 1870s mention the lice the way they mention the wind: present, persistent, not worthy of significant remark. One diary from a Cattletown traveller in Abilene in 1871 notes, in the same paragraph, rough road from the depot, good beans at supper, lice, in that order. The lice rank third. Behind the beans, this is where the straw makes itself known again. Bedbugs lay their eggs at the seam where straw meets canvas, and the seam runs the full perimeter of the mattress, which means the perimeter is currently discussing your situation in a language that is small and numerous. A drummer named Wallace, passing through Cheyenne in 1879, writes that he removed his bedroll from his pack, laid it directly on the floor, and slept better than he had in 6 consecutive nights of mattress use. Wallace had learned something. The floor has fewer opinions. Of course, the man before you in this bed didn't know about Wallace's method, or didn't care, or arrived too tired to implement it. The sheets are still dented from his head. Not warm. He's been gone long enough for the warmth to leave, but shaped. The pillow holds the exact impression of a skull that isn't yours. Hot-bunking, they call it. The previous occupant left biological evidence of his existence in every fibre. You pull the sheet up anyway. The sheet is grey from infrequent washing, not infrequent enthusiasm, just infrequent water. Now the scratching begins in earnest around 1 in the morning, which is when the room wakes up to itself. The man in the next bunk scratches his forearm with the methodical patience of a man who has been doing this for months. A second man, somewhere near the window, shifts his whole body sideways. Someone sighs. Nobody speaks. There is a shared understanding in a room like this that complaint is not a productive contribution to the group project of surviving until dawn. You scratch your ankle. You scratch your collarbone. The kerosene lamp is out, and the darkness has weight. The management, meaning the widow who runs this establishment and whose name is Margaret, and who knocked the head off a drunk teamster last Thursday with a cast-iron skillet, and then resumed her bookkeeping, Margaret does not offer remedies, she offers beds. The distinction is important to her and is reflected in the rate. Turpentine rubbed on the wooden bed frame slows an infestation somewhat, a technique known throughout the region and practiced sporadically at best. Margaret's frames have not met turpentine recently. The frames know this. They are comfortable with the arrangement. You wake before the bell because something has been moving on your scalp. You sit up and run 2 fingers through your hair along the part, and you feel the small hard bodies that are head lice. Then, because the protocol is the protocol, you check the inside seams of your shirt for body lice. Then, because life is what it is, you check the third place that lice live. You find all 3. You finish the inventory by sunrise and move on to breakfast. The wash basin is down the hall. It was filled once, at first light, by whoever drew the short straw that morning, and it has not been emptied since. You are the 9th man at it. The water is the colour of a decision you regret. A thin ring of grey foam sits at the surface like it's been there since the Polk administration. You splash your face anyway, because the alternative is not splashing your face, and you're a professional. Let's talk about the towel. It's not a towel. It's a length of flour sacking nailed to a hook beside the basin, and somewhere between the 3rd and 4th man it stopped being absorbent and started being decorative. You dry your face on your sleeve. Your sleeve is also not clean. Nobody's sleeve is clean. The sleeve has accepted its role. A man named Dutch Carl stands at the other end of the hall, running a fine-toothed comb through his beard with the focused calm of a surgeon. He holds the comb up to the kerosene lamp after each pass and examines it. He does this every morning. He has a system. The system does not work, but he believes in it the way other men believe in weather forecasts and fair employers. Breakfast is at 6 sharp. It is always at 6 sharp. There is no other time breakfast has ever occurred. The dining table is a plank on sawhorses and it seats 12 men at a time, shoulder to shoulder, with no ceremony about who sits where and no conversation that isn't about the shift starting in 40 minutes. Salt pork, cornbread, and coffee brewed in an iron pot that has been reheating since 4 in the morning, which means by the time your tin cup hits the table, it is half sediment and half something that tastes like a boot that fell into a campfire and then remembered it was also a boot. You drink it. Of course you drink it. You drink it in 3 swallows and put the cup down and wait for the cornbread, which is mostly a structural element, present, technically edible, performing the concept of bread without committing to any of its promises. The canned goods are at the end of the table. Beans, mostly. The cans have a faint metallic sweetness that you've stopped noticing, the way you stop noticing the smell of your own clothes. What you can't notice is the lead solder sealing each seam, doing its quiet work in your bloodstream. Nobody knows yet. The headaches are from the altitude. The headaches are from the shift. The headaches are from whatever it is that gives men on the frontier headaches, which is everything. And none of it has a name that helps. You push back from the plank, collect your hat and step outside into the cold. Somewhere up the hill, the day shift is already moving. The bell hasn't rung yet, but it will. It always does. You've got 40 minutes, a body full of substandard coffee, and 3 varieties of lice, all of which will still be there when you get back. That part you can count on. You hear the bell at 4:50, which is the proprietress signaling that breakfast will be served in 10 minutes whether you are awake or not. You go to the long table in the dining room, which is also the kitchen, which is also the sleeping room if last night was particularly busy. You sit on a bench with 11 other men, and the food appears in large enamel dishes from which everyone serves themselves at the same time. You bring your own tin plate. The plate is a small, flat, unenthusiastic landscape, and the food sitting on it is a quiet, salted, and week-old argument with the morning. Salt pork, which has been in the pan since 4:15 and is still somehow both burned and underdone at the same time. Cornbread in a wedge shape, dense enough to drive a nail with. Boiled beans left over from yesterday's midday dinner and reheated without apparent ceremony. The cornbread is mostly a structural element. It holds the plate together more than it feeds you. The coffee arrives in a shared iron pot and gets poured into whatever vessel you brought. It's been on the stove since before the bell, reheated from last night's remainder, and it tastes exactly like what it is, the third performance of the same liquid, thickening slightly with each encore. By 7 o'clock, the bottom third is pure sediment. A man named Horace at the far end of the bench drinks it anyway. Horace drinks it every morning. Horace has opinions about nobody. There are no fresh vegetables. There is no shelf where fresh vegetables would go. In boom period mining towns, produce arrived by mule or wagon from farms that were anywhere from 2 days to 2 weeks away, which means produce arrived already composting. You eat what didn't spoil. Potatoes sometimes. Turnips occasionally. The subclinical scurvy builds quietly in the background, politely, like a house guest who hasn't mentioned he's been stealing from you. Of course, there are also the canned goods. Beans from a can, sometimes. Peaches, if the proprietress is feeling extravagant or it's someone's birthday, which nobody announces. The cans are sealed with lead solder, which is fine, because nobody in 1873 knows this is a problem. The lead leaches slowly into the contents and then into you, producing a kind of dull, persistent fatigue that you attribute to hard work, which there is also plenty of. You can't distinguish between the two. Neither can your doctor, who is 3 towns over and mostly treats bullet wounds. Breakfast takes 11 minutes. There is no menu, no order, no choice. You eat what appears. A woman named Cecilia Dowd, who runs the establishment with the organizational efficiency of someone managing a small railroad and the warmth of someone who has been managing men since 1861, moves between kitchen and table without stopping. She refills the pork pan. She does not ask how you're doing. She sets the cornbread down in a cast-iron skillet and walks away before anyone can make eye contact. The meal ends when the food ends. Nobody lingers. You have a shift that starts before the sun has fully committed to rising, and the man taking your bunk slot tonight needs you out of the dining room so he can eat his dinner at the table that is currently your breakfast table. The enamel dishes go back into the kitchen. The tin plates go back into your coat pocket. The iron pot stays on the stove, accumulating toward noon. You take your coffee outside if the weather permits, which it frequently doesn't. The morning air smells like the outhouse behind the lot and the mule pen one street over, and faintly the salt pork which has followed you. You drink the coffee standing up. It's not good. It's not bad. It is hot, which is the only performance criterion it has ever been asked to meet, and in that one category it succeeds. You take a tin cup off the rack and you ladle yourself a quantity of liquid from the iron pot on the back of the stove. The liquid is dark. The liquid is bitter. The liquid has been brewed once at 4:30 in the morning and reheated approximately 4 times since then, and it will be reheated 3 more times before the pot is finally emptied at noon. The grounds are still in the pot. There is no filter. The bottom inch of your cup will be sludge. By the time you reach the bottom third of the cup, you're no longer drinking coffee, you're eating it. The grounds have settled into a dark, thick and patient paste that coats the inside of the tin and stays there. A man named Virgil at the far end of the table tilts his cup back and drinks it anyway, chin up, eyes closed, the way a person receives a sacrament or a diagnosis. He sets the cup down without expression. He does this every morning. He has made his peace. The iron pot itself has not been scrubbed in recent memory. Previous batches have left a dark residue lacquered to the inside walls, and each new brew incorporates a thin historical record of every prior pot that season. There's an argument to be made that you're drinking August in addition to October. The coffee tastes of boiled leather and resolution and something faintly metallic that you've learned not to examine too closely, which is, for the record, doing a lot of work for what is technically breakfast. Now, the cup itself, tin, dented on one side where it's been dropped, or thrown, or used briefly as a tool. The handle conducts heat at a rate that keeps you honest. You hold it by the rim with 2 fingers like a man who has already burned himself exactly once and retained the information. The cup was yours last week. It may or may not be yours today. The rack doesn't organize by ownership. You take what's there. 1, 2, 2, 2. The man before you left it clean enough, which in this context means he rinsed it with coffee. Each pass over the heat doesn't freshen the pot, it concentrates it. By the 6 o'clock ladle, the coffee is approximately twice as strong as it was at 4:30, and by 8 it has achieved a density of purpose that no reasonable beverage should possess. It's not pick-you-up coffee, it's hold-you-down coffee. Your hands aren't shaking because you're cold. Your hands are shaking because the coffee has decided your schedule. Of course, there's no alternative. The pot is the pot. Cecilia Dowd brewed it at 4:30 and walked away, and the pot has been governing itself ever since. Tea isn't available. Fresh milk isn't available. Water from the barrel in the corner is available, technically, but the barrel shares a proximity with the kitchen floor that makes the coffee seem optimistic by comparison. You drink the coffee. You drink it fast, before it cools into something closer to tar, and you carry the last 2 inches to the door and pour them into the yard where the ground has been accepting coffee deposits long enough that nothing grows there anymore. Virgil doesn't pour his out. Virgil has never poured his out. You've watched him work through the full cup, sediment and all, with the systematic patience of a man completing paperwork. He sets the empty tin on the table upside down when he's finished, his signal that he's done, or possibly a warning. Nobody has asked. The cup sits there. The pot keeps heating. You serve yourself a portion from the central dish, which contains salt pork, beans, and a single yellow square of cornbread. You do this quickly. There is no second helping policy stated aloud, but everyone at the bench understands that the dish is finite and the dish is shared. You eat with a tin spoon and a tin plate. You do not speak. Conversation at breakfast is not forbidden, exactly, but it is not the custom, and the men around you are eating against a shift clock. The salt pork arrived in barrels. It has been in barrels for a while. The exact duration is not a detail anyone volunteers, and you've learned not to ask, because the answer is always longer than you wanted and shorter than would legally require an explanation. It's cured, which is a word that means preserved, which is a word that means it won't kill you today. The fat is yellowish. The lean is greyish. Together they produce a salty, smoky, faintly suspicious flavour that is technically food and spiritually a negotiation. The cornbread arrives as a dense, yellow, and faintly resigned block beside it. The beans are the real foundation, not the salt pork, not the cornbread, the beans. They've been soaking since yesterday, which is the most forward-thinking thing anyone does in this establishment. A man named Denton at the far end of the bench eats his beans without looking at them, which is the correct technique developed through weeks of practice. He lifts the spoon, he delivers the contents. His face does not participate in the transaction. The cornbread is mostly a structural element. It absorbs the bean liquid and the salt pork grease and becomes a kind of edible mortar that holds the meal together in your stomach until noon, at which point the situation becomes your own problem. It isn't sweet. There's no sugar to spare for that. It's just cornmeal and water and heat, pressed into a shape that technically qualifies as bread under a generous interpretation of the word. Now, the canned goods. On days when there are canned goods, tomatoes, occasionally, or tinned beef, you eat them without complaint. They have a faint metallic aftertaste that everyone attributes to the tin, and nobody attributes to the lead solder sealing the seams, because the diagnosis for that doesn't exist yet. Your teeth feel slightly odd afterward. You decide it's nothing. It is in fact something. It will continue being something for several more years, silently, with no paperwork. There are no fresh vegetables. The subclinical scurvy moves slowly. It announces itself as fatigue, as bleeding gums, as a general sense that your body is reconsidering its commitments. You don't connect it to the food, because the food has always been like this. You connect it to the altitude, or the shift length, or the man who snores in the bunk above you. All of those are also problems. None of them are the problem. The meal takes 11 minutes. You know this because Cecilia Dowd begins clearing the bench at 11 minutes, regardless of where you are in the process. She doesn't announce it. She doesn't ask. She simply arrives with a rag in one hand and her intentions in the other, and the bench clears the way a river clears a sandbar, not by force, exactly, but by the absolute certainty of the current. The tin plates go into a basin. The tin spoons go into the same basin. The basin does not get especially hot water. It gets water. You stand. You put on your coat. You pick up your hat from the hook near the door, which is your hat's only protected real estate in this establishment. Outside, the sky is still the grey-blue of early morning, and the street smells like a cattle shipping season, which is to say it smells like something with strong opinions. You have 40 minutes before shift. You spend 14 of them standing in it. You step up to the wash basin, which is a tin pan filled with water at 5 in the morning by the proprietress and not emptied again until evening. You are the 7th man to use it this morning. The water has a film. The film is partly soap, partly skin, partly mine dust, partly hair. You dip your hands, you rinse your face, you dry on the shared towel, which has a complicated relationship with cleanliness and an even more complicated relationship with laundry. 7th is a poor draw, mathematically. The first 3 men got water. The next 3 got mostly water. You got the back end of the next 3. The 9 after you will get a substance, the proprietress's daughter Clara, 12, already exhausted by the world, already running coffee at breakfast, will at some point need to declare finished and tip out the back door. Clara has a sense for the moment. She's better at it than the men are. The towel hangs from a nail beside the basin on a length of rope, and it has been there long enough to have developed a personality. Not a good one. It is grey, stiff, and reliably indifferent. The kind of grey that suggests it was not always grey, that something happened, incrementally, over many mornings, and nobody thought to stop it. You press it to your face. It smells like the last 6 men who pressed it to their faces. You hand it to the man behind you without comment. He takes it without comment. This is how the frontier builds community. The man ahead of you is a driller named Holt, who has been here 3 weeks longer than you, and conducts his entire morning routine with the focused efficiency of someone running very late to something he already knows will disappoint. Him, he cupped both hands, sluiced, was done in under 8 seconds. You watched, you thought, that's the move. You tried it. Your face is still not clean. The mine dust has opinions about leaving. Now, the basin itself. By man number 12 or 13, it stops being water in any meaningful sense and begins being a collaborative project. A thin crust forms at the edge. Something floats near the center that you choose, for your own well-being, not to identify. The proprietress will tip it out at dusk. Until then, it sits on its stand like a very small, very disappointing pond. The kind of pond that would fail a health inspection if health inspections existed yet, which they mostly don't. Actual bathing requires leaving the boarding house entirely. The bathhouse down the block charges 25 cents, sometimes 50, for a tub of hot water and a sliver of lye soap the size and texture of a domino. That's 2 hours of your wages. You go on Saturdays, roughly, when the week's accumulation becomes socially mandatory rather than merely personal. Some men go less. You've shared a bunk with those men. The bunk remembers. The bathhouse water, for what it's worth, is also not changed between every customer. The tub is topped off with hot water from a kettle, the previous man's leavings diluted to an acceptable approximation of fresh. It's basically a hot tub, which sounds luxurious until you understand that the hot tub has been this way for 6 men before you, and the proprietor is already eyeing the 7th waiting outside the curtain. You take your 20 minutes. You dry with the bathhouse towel, which has the same biography as the one back at the boarding house but charges more for the privilege. Back at the basin, the 8th man steps up. He is younger, has been in camp maybe 2 weeks, and still approaches the pan with a flicker of hesitation, a brief pause where he looks at the water and clearly considers his options and then clearly concludes he doesn't have any. He dips his hands. He rinses. He dries. The towel accepts him. He walks to breakfast without speaking. That hesitation disappears by week 3, not because the water gets better, because you do. You take the towel down from its peg on the dining room wall. The towel has a name, informally. The men call it the rag, or the grey, or, if they are being precise about it, the situation. It was once white. It has been used by approximately 36 different men since its last washing, and it will be washed again on Sunday if the proprietress has time after the bread. You wipe your face. You hang it back on the peg. The towel is not a towel. It's a damp, communal and inherited decision. The washing itself happens once a week. The proprietress, let's say her name is Mrs. Holt, because someone runs this operation and someone has to have a name, fills a cast iron tub with water heated over the same fire that cooked your beans. She adds lye soap. She works through the pile in order of size, smallest items first, largest last, the towel going in somewhere in the middle because it occupies a philosophical position between clothing and furniture. She wrings it out by hand. She hangs it on a line in the yard. It dries in approximately 1 hour in the Nevada sun, which is doing its best. Then it goes back on the peg, technically clean. It will reach its current condition again by Wednesday. Clean is a generous, optimistic, willfully imprecise word out here. The water supply for a 40-man boarding house comes from a shared well, a rain barrel, or a delivery wagon that charges by the barrel. None of these sources are running, none of them are filtered. The well in Tombstone sits 30 feet from the outhouse, which is not a coincidence anyone planned, it's just the distance that felt polite at the time. You don't have the information to be alarmed about this. The information doesn't exist yet. A man named Hector, who works the day shift and smells permanently of sulfur and ambition, takes the towel down every morning with the same 2-fingered grip, the way you might handle evidence. He wipes his forehead. He examines the towel briefly, as if it might have improved overnight. It has not. He hangs it back. He does this every day. He has been doing this for 11 months. He plans to do it until the vein runs out. Hygiene out here is less a practice and more a philosophical position. You are in favor of it, in the abstract. You wash your hands before meals when there is water to wash them with, which is most mornings, using the basin that was covered earlier in this story and does not need to be revisited. You own a comb. You run it through your hair on Sundays, which is also when you change your shirt, assuming you have a second shirt, which not everyone does. The man in the next bunk has one shirt. He washes it in the creek on the first Sunday of the month and wears it wet back to the boarding house because it dries faster on a body than off one. This is practical. This is also why the room smells the way it does at 6 in the morning when 20 men are breathing in the same enclosed space and the window is latched because the latch is stuck and nobody has fixed it since April. The laundry situation belongs to someone else entirely. By 1880, there are approximately 7,500 Chinese-operated laundries across the American West. Men who were excluded from the mines, from the boarding houses, from most of the legal economy, and who built an industry out of the one task the camps couldn't organize themselves. You bring them your shirts on Thursday. You collect them Saturday. They come back, pressed and folded, smelling of hot linen, briefly perfect. You wear the shirt into the mine on Monday. The towel, though, is boarding house property. You don't bring the towel to the laundry. The towel belongs to Mrs. Holt the way the table belongs to Mrs. Holt, and the peg it hangs on, and the nail the peg is hammered into, and the wall the nail goes through, which in this particular building is green pine that has warped enough to let in a blade of morning light at the exact angle that hits your eyes when you are trying to sleep in, and is nobody's fault and everybody's problem. The towel is part of the infrastructure. You don't question the infrastructure. You wipe your face, you hang it back, you go eat your cornbread. You step out into the back lot at 5:15, and there is already a man waiting at the door of the outhouse. Behind him, another man is approaching from the far corner of the lot, walking with the particular quickened gait of a man who is committed. The outhouse serves the entire boarding house, which is to say roughly 40 men, and the outhouse has not been pumped since the previous October. You take your place in line. You wait. The conversation is brief and entirely about weather. The pit itself is not a small pit. It is a pit that has developed over several months of continuous use by 40 men eating primarily beans and salt pork, a deep, settled, quietly editorial personality. The smell reaches the back door of the boarding house in the morning and doesn't exactly recede so much as become familiar. By 6 o'clock you've stopped noticing it. The pit's morning air is a thick, sweet and organic argument that the nose eventually concedes. By 6:15 you're not sure you ever noticed anything at all. The structure above the pit is single-wall planking, not sealed, with a crescent moon cut into the door that serves the dual function of ventilation and, in the dark, navigation. The latch is a piece of bent wire. The wire has opinions. You learn quickly not to trust the wire from the inside, because the man third in line has already knocked twice, not because he is impatient, but because he cannot see and assumes the door is stuck. It is not stuck, you are simply present. Now, one advantage of the frontier boarding house outhouse over nothing, and the advantage is real, if narrow, is that it exists at all. Plenty of camps didn't bother. In the early days at Virginia City, before the boarding houses consolidated, the arrangement was closer to optimistic improvisation, a shovel, a general direction, a social contract that nobody had signed. The pit represents progress. You are choosing to remember this. A man named Hector Briggs manages the lot. His job is to arrange for pumping when the situation becomes exceptional. Exceptional is a word Hector applies with tremendous conservatism. He stands near the back fence in the mornings holding a coffee cup, the same iron pot coffee, reheated since 4 a metre. Currently half sediment, and surveys the queue with the serene authority of someone who has decided that nothing here is technically his fault. He nods at you. You nod back. The pit will not be pumped this week. The queue moves. 6 men, 7, shuffling forward in the early grey light with their suspenders half buckled and their boots unlaced. Nobody is speaking above a murmur. The man at the front emerges, nods at no one in particular, and heads back inside at a pace that suggests he has achieved what he came for. The next man enters. The wire engages. The queue advances 1 position. The well is 23 feet from the pit. In dry months, this is an inconvenience. In wet months, when the ground softens and the water table rises, it is a slow negotiation between 2 holes in the ground, and the well is not winning. The communal wash basin you encountered before dawn, filled once, never emptied, drew from this well. The canned beans, sealed with lead solder that you had for dinner, came out of a pot boiled in water from this well. The water is not visibly wrong, it just has ambitions. Typhoid found Tombstone in 1882. Cholera moved through Missouri River towns in 1866. Both travelled primarily by water, and both found plenty of infrastructure to work with. You don't know this yet. The germ theory of disease is still being argued about in journals you'll never read, in cities you've never visited. What you know is that some men get sick and some men don't, and the ones who get sick sometimes recover and sometimes don't recover, and in either case nobody pumps the pit. You reach the front of the line, the wire gives. You pull the door shut behind you. Outside, the queue continues. You hand your bundle to a Chinese laundryman, who in the boarding house ledger is recorded simply as Mr. Wong, although Mr. Wong is not actually his name. Mr. Wong runs one of the 7,500 Chinese laundries operating in the American West by 1880, and Mr. Wong charges 15 cents per shirt, 10 cents per trouser, and 5 cents for anything smaller. He returns your shirts on Tuesday. The folds are precise. You will wear the same shirt until next Tuesday regardless of what happens to it in the meantime. Mr. Wong exists by elimination. When Chinese labourers arrived to build the Central Pacific Railroad in the 1860s, they were barred from most other work. Mining companies wouldn't hire them past a certain depth. Boarding houses wouldn't rent them a slot, hot-bunked or otherwise. What they could do, legally and without a white cosigner, was laundry. By 1880, Chinese-operated laundries processed somewhere between a third and a half of all commercial washing in the American West. The laundry itself is a narrow building, one room deep, with flat irons heated on a wood stove that runs from 4 in the morning until 10 at night. The smell is a hot, starchy and faintly scorched cloud, steam, and lye and cotton, with a secondary note of whatever the previous customer was doing in his shirt for the preceding week. The laundrymen work in the heat the same way you work in the mine, without particular expression, because expression costs energy and energy is finite. A man named Chen Wei, who everyone calls Charlie, can press 18 shirts in an hour. He doesn't look up when you come in. He knows your bundle by weight. The segregation is formal and local simultaneously. Most cattle towns and mining camps have a section, called Chinatown, though the men inside do not call it that, where Chinese workers live, eat, and operate businesses among themselves because the main boarding houses won't have them. The section is usually the worst land in town, the drainage end, the downhill side, nearest the industrial smell. The buildings are smaller than the frame boarding houses and often older, and yet the Fong houses inside them are, by most surviving accounts, more organized than the establishments renting beds in shifts to whoever arrived with 2 bits. There's a communal room. There are rules about it. The rules are followed. None of this earns Mr. Wong legal standing. The Chinese Exclusion Act doesn't pass until 1882, but before it does, individual state and municipal ordinances accomplish much the same work with more paperwork. California taxes Chinese laundries specifically. Several Nevada counties require Chinese workers to carry identity papers that no other worker carries. The fee for the paper changes annually. The fee always goes up. So you hand Mr. Wong your bundle on a Friday, and he hands it back Tuesday, folded with the kind of precision that makes your boarding house room feel briefly like a place a person chose to be. He charges you 40 cents for the lot. You pay without negotiating, because 40 cents is fair, and because you know, in a way, nobody discusses directly that he is charging you what he can, and not what he'd like. The Tuesday shirt will stay on your back until the following Tuesday. The sheet on your bunk will not be laundered at all this month. That is a separate budget category. It is, in practice, not a budget category. You decide on a Saturday to take a bath. The decision is not casual. A bath costs 25 cents at the cheapest bathhouse on Main Street, which is between 2 and 4 hours of your day's wages depending on the seam you are working that month. You walk there with a clean shirt under your arm. You pay the attendant. You take your turn in the wooden tub, which has been used by 4 men before you and has been topped up, not emptied, between each occupant. The water is warm in the way that all shared warm things are warm, generously described, optimistically labelled, fundamentally compromised. There's a grey, slick and patient film at the waterline that arrived before you did and will be here after you leave. You lower yourself in anyway because the alternative is not bathing, and you have been not bathing since last Saturday. The soap is a communal block sitting on the rim of the tub. It has a shape now. The shape is not yours. The soap started the week as a hard yellow rectangle. By Saturday afternoon it has been worked into something more personal, a smooth, smudged, vaguely hand-shaped object that carries the Palmer history of every man on the shift. You use it anyway. Meanwhile, the attendant, a teenager named Carl, who wears the same canvas apron every day and has the expression of someone who has already made peace with his career choices, tops up the tub from a kettle that's been sitting on a wood stove in the back room. The water comes out darker than it went in. Carl does not comment on this. Neither do you. The etiquette of the Saturday bathhouse requires a certain collaborative optimism about what constitutes clean. You have 20 minutes. The bathhouse charges by the unit, not the hour, and the unit is 1 tub fill and a rough approximation of time. Carl will knock on the partition when the next man is waiting, which is always. There is always a next man. On Saturday mornings, the queue extends out the door and partway down the boardwalk, 40 men in various stages of the working week standing in a line that smells exactly like a line of 40 men who have not yet had their bath. The clean shirt is folded on the bench by the door. You brought it specifically for this moment, the dry side moment after the tub, when you are briefly and genuinely cleaner than you have been all week. You put it on. It is, for approximately the next 4 hours, a clean shirt. Then it becomes a shirt you are wearing in a boarding house, and by Monday it will have rejoined the general atmosphere. The bath costs 25 cents. The walk back to the boarding house takes 6 minutes. By the time you sit down at the supper table, the shirt has already started negotiating with the room. The room wins. It always wins. You go to sleep with your boots tucked under the pillow, or, if the pillow is not yours, between your knees. Boots cost $3 to $7 a pair at the general store. Boots are 2 weeks of wages for the average miner. Boots also signal to anyone awake at 3 in the morning that the man wearing them is solvent. There are men in this boarding house who are not solvent. There are men in this boarding house who are watching the man who is. There is a knife in the room. Not your knife. Your bunkmate carries it in a leather sheath sewn to the inside of his right boot, which is also currently tucked under his own knees, which means there's a knife pressed against the back of your calf and you're both pretending this is fine. He's a man named Garrett who hasn't slept a full night since Cheyenne. Neither have you. Nobody in this room has. The man on your left is grinding his teeth. The man behind the partition is coughing again. Theft in a frontier boarding house is less a moral failure and more a business model. You don't steal out of malice. You steal because your boots are held together with a strip of harness leather and a belief in God, and the man next to you has boots with the original stitching intact. In Virginia City during the early 1860s, a man who slept on bare floor planks, 50 cents for the privilege, boots repurposed as a pillow, performing both jobs poorly, woke to find his neighbor had simply walked away in the dark, wearing 2 left boots rather than leave empty-handed. This is a documented outcome. The neighbor didn't make it far. The kerosene lamp in the hallway stays lit all night, which sounds reassuring and isn't. It casts a yellow, unsteady light that makes every shape in the room look like a problem you haven't identified yet. Shadows move. Some of them are men going to the outhouse. Some of them are men conducting an inventory of what's around them. You can't always tell which is which, and the lamp, to its credit, doesn't help. It just flickers. It has flickered like this every night for 3 months, and it has the energy of something that has already given up. Garrett, to his credit, is a light sleeper. You know this because at 2 in the morning he sits up from a dead stop, one hand already on the boot with the knife, and stares at the door for a full 30 seconds before lying back down without a word. You've seen him do this 4 times. He's never explained it. You've never asked. This is also a kind of frontier etiquette. The understanding that some things a man watches for in the dark are his own business, and asking about them is the second worst thing you could do. The man 2 bunks over is named Earl. Earl checks his boots at 3 in the morning the way other men check their pockets after a half-dream, one hand sliding down, finding the leather, registering the weight, retracting. He does this without opening his eyes. He has done it every night since November. The night a pair of boots actually does go missing from this room, and a pair will, eventually, nobody will ask who has new boots. Somebody will simply have them. The protocol around the discovery is that there is no protocol. The boots arrive, the boots leave. The room, professionally, does not notice either event. Dodge City put a firearm ordinance on the books in 1878. Visitors check their guns with the marshal or the hotel proprietor at the edge of town. The ordinance did not cover knives, which is the kind of legislative gap that says a lot about what the city council considered a reasonable baseline for human behavior. Wyatt Earp, for his part, preferred pistol whipping to shooting, practical, quieter, and considerably cheaper on the paperwork. A Colt single-action army ran $12 in 1873. That's 4 days' wages. You don't fire a 4 days' wages instrument at a man whose boots you could just take. By 3 in the morning, the room is a specific kind of loud that sounds like silence. The tooth-grinding man has stopped. The coughing man behind the partition has entered a phase of ominous quiet that is either sleep or something worse, and nobody is checking. You have one hand on your left boot and one hand on nothing in particular, and you are not quite asleep and not quite awake, which is the boarding house's natural resting state. It is less like rest and more like a brief administrative pause between problems. You are assigned, because you arrived after the regulars, the bed nearest the wall lamp. The lamp burns kerosene. The lamp burns it all night on a low wick because the proprietress wants men to find the outhouse without breaking a leg. The wick deposits a thin, oily film on the wall above your head, and a thinner film on your face, and a third, invisible film somewhere in your lungs. You will not notice the third film for several years. The first 2 you notice by morning. The lamp is not the only light source. Across the room, a second lamp sits on the communal table where 3 men are still playing cards. They've been playing since supper. The lamp over the card game is turned higher, which means more oily film, distributed more widely, shared democratically among everyone trying to sleep. The cards slap the table with a specific rhythm that is not quite a clock and not quite a metronome, close enough to both that you can't ignore it. The lamp is 18 inches from the dry, brittle, paper-stuffed wall. The wall is green lumber with gaps. The newspaper was there when you arrived. It will not necessarily be there by morning, because men pull it out in the night to blow their noses or handle other business that you have decided not to think about too carefully. A gap in the wall is, in practical terms, a chimney waiting for an occasion. The lamp provides the occasion. Nobody in this room has considered this sequence of events. Deadwood burned in 1879. Virginia City burned in 1875. The Deadwood fire started in a bakery and took most of a city block before anyone with water arrived. The Virginia City fire started in a boarding house, specifically in a room not much different from this one, with a lamp not much different from this one, at a distance from the wall not much different from this one. You are aware of this the way you are aware of most things in a frontier boarding house, not as a panic, just as a low hum beneath everything else. The window is on the far wall, above the bunk where Delmar, a 40-year-old driller from Ohio who has not spoken voluntarily to anyone in 2 weeks, sleeps with his arms folded across his chest like a man practicing for something. The window latch sticks. You know it sticks because you tried it yesterday when the room smelled worse than usual, which is a high bar. You lifted the latch, it moved a 1/4 inch, and stopped. You are on an upper floor. The stairs run past the kitchen. If the kitchen goes first, the stairs go with it. The window latch has made no comment on any of this. The card game breaks up around midnight. 2 men shuffle to their bunks. The third, a skinner named Holt, refills his lamp before sitting back down with a newspaper he can barely read in the remaining light, squinting at it with the focused desperation of a man who has no other way to be alone. He tilts the paper toward the flame. The flame tilts back toward the paper. Holt doesn't notice, or notices and accepts this as a reasonable arrangement between consenting parties. You lie on your back. The kerosene smell has a texture at this point, a heavy, sweet, and faintly chemical presence, like the air has been upholstered in something slightly wrong. The oily residue on your face catches the lamp's yellow flicker. Your lungs do whatever lungs do when nobody is watching. The third film settles in quietly and makes itself comfortable. It has all night. You arrive in Dodge City in the spring of 1878, and the first thing the boarding house clerk requests of you, before your name, before your money, is your pistol. There is a town ordinance. The ordinance says no firearms within city limits. The boarding house keeps a wooden box behind the front counter, and your Colt single-action army goes into the box. You receive a numbered wooden chit. You will get your pistol back when you leave town, not before, and the marshal himself has been known to enforce this. The Colt cost you $12. That's roughly 4 days of wages if you're a labourer, which you are. It lives in a holster that has softened and darkened from use, and smells like a warm, dark, and faintly anxious leather. You've carried it for 2 years and fired it twice, once at a coyote, once at nothing in particular, at night, when the silence got too specific. The box behind the counter already holds 9 other guns. The clerk sets yours on top without ceremony, like a coat check at a restaurant where everyone ordered the same thing. The violence itself is smaller than Hollywood sells. Dodge City, at its absolute peak chaos, averaged 1.5 homicides per year. 1.5. For a cattle town receiving 150,000 head annually, and all the men trailing them. Most frontier violence involved knives, razors, and fists, tools that don't require a reload and don't wake the whole street. Wyatt Earp's preferred method wasn't the draw. It was walking up behind someone and hitting them with the pistol he'd just taken from them. Efficient, quiet, leaves the gun intact. Marshal Ed Masterson, Bat's brother, collected firearms from arriving cowboys the way a dentist's receptionist collects paperwork. You hand it over, you get a number, you move on. The system worked well enough that most men complied. The men who didn't comply had a different kind of evening. The chit lives in your vest pocket. Every time you reach in for a coin, you pull out the chit instead. It's a small rectangle of wood, number 14 burned into it with something hot, and it represents the one meaningful thing you own that isn't currently keeping your head off a corn husk mattress. You sleep with it under the boot that isn't your pillow. The other boarders have their own chits. There's a quiet solidarity in this. 12 men in a 40 by 20 frame building, all temporarily disarmed, all individually certain they're the one who would have used it responsibly. Of course, the ordnance didn't cover everything. It covered pistols. It was less clear on knives. A miner named Gressley, 2 bunks down, has a Bowie knife with a handle worn smooth from handling. The ordnance has not spoken to Gressley about this. The knife sits on the nail above his bunk like a piece of art. The wooden box fills up fast during trail season. By May, the clerk has a second box. By June, the second box has a lid problem. There's a man whose job it is simply to manage the gun deposit, not to cook, not to clean, just to stand near the boxes and hand out chits and keep a written ledger. His handwriting is excellent. His job is the least Western thing in the entire West, which is perhaps why he does it with such visible satisfaction. You study the chit before bed. Number 14. The lamp is already out. Delmar, the Ohio driller, extinguished it early, which everyone respects. In the dark, the chit is just a small weight in your hand. Outside, someone is playing a piano, badly but with conviction, the same 3 chords in rotation, as if repetition will eventually produce a 4th. It won't. You already know it won't. You've been here 4 days. You learn, by the second week of your stay, that the fights in this boarding house do not generally involve pistols. Pistols are checked at the door, or stored under the proprietress's counter, or, in some establishments, simply against the printed rules. The fights involve knives, and they involve the straight razors kept for shaving. A straight razor is 6 inches long, sharp on one edge, and within arm's reach of every man in the building. A disagreement over a bed slot does not need to escalate far before it reaches the razor. The Bowie knife, which the ordnance declined to address, remains in circulation throughout the building at all times. Gressley keeps his tucked behind his left boot, which he also uses as a pillow, which means the knife is always at approximately head height. This is a man who has thought about where his enemies are likely to be standing. The fights start over small things, not gold, not women, not political conviction. Usually it's a bed slot. You came off shift at 4 in the morning and found your assigned space occupied by a man who claims, with complete sincerity and closed eyes, that he got here first. The slot costs 35 cents. The argument escalates to 75 cents worth of noise in under 3 minutes. Someone's razor appears. Someone's left hand starts bleeding. The proprietress arrives with a lamp and a tired, level, professionally resigned expression, not alarmed, not sympathetic, just the look of a woman who has already costed out the bedsheet. She carries the lamp with a slow, steady, and unimpressed calm that has already costed out the morning. Wyatt Earp, who is working as a deputy marshal some blocks away and has become something of a local legend, handles most incidents with the barrel of his pistol applied firmly to the back of a man's skull. No gunshot required. This is considered, in the official record, a peaceful resolution. The official record and the man's skull disagree somewhat on this point. Meanwhile, the knife culture has its own unwritten logic. A razor fight stays between 2 men and ends when one of them sits down. A gun escalates, it draws a crowd, it brings law, it fills out a coroner's report and attracts newspaper copy. Nobody in this boarding house wants newspaper copy. The men here are hiding from exactly 2 things: their previous employers and their previous wives. The razor is, in this sense, a discrete instrument. Contained. Local. The wound is personal. The problem stays in the room. There is a man called Dupree, no first name offered, none requested, who has a scar running from his left ear to the corner of his mouth that curves slightly upward, giving him the permanent appearance of finding something mildly amusing. He says the scar is from a razor dispute in a Leadville boarding house, 1879, over a plate of beans. He says this without particular emphasis. The beans, he adds, were not good beans. This does not change his position on the matter. The vigilante committees that operated through mining camps in the early 1860s, Montana's 1863 to 1864 hangings, took out somewhere north of 20 men in 4 months, handled things the boarding house can't. Big crimes, named criminals, men with reputations long enough to fill a wanted poster. The boarding house handles everything below that threshold, which is most of it. A missing pocket watch, a disputed quarter, a man who snored so aggressively that 3 other men moved to the floor and one of them decided this constituted grounds. The formal legal system stops at the county line and resumes at the next county line. In between is whatever you and Dupree can work out before the lamp runs out of oil. The straight razor gets wiped on the bedsheet afterward. This is also the sheet you sleep on. The sheet has seen a great deal and developed no opinions about any of it. You meet Mary Murphy, your proprietress, on your first morning at the boarding house. She is 38 years old, she has buried 2 husbands, and she runs this place with the operational efficiency of a small military post. She has rules. The rules are printed on a board behind the front counter. No drinking inside, no firearms above the ground floor, no fighting in the dining room, no women on the premises except herself and her daughter, who is 12. The rules are enforced personally, and the rules are enforced the same way every time. The board is not a suggestion. You know this because a man named Cord tested the firearms rule on his second night, carried his Colt up the stairs, and found his mattress slot reassigned before he came down in the morning. His belongings were stacked outside by the door. Mary did not confront him. She did not need to. Cord stood on the porch for 11 minutes before walking away. Mary watched from the kitchen window and then returned to the beans. The numbers behind this place are unromantic. Mary feeds 40 men twice a day. She sources salt pork, cornmeal, dried beans, and coffee in bulk from the general merchant on 3rd Street, who charges her slightly less than he charges everyone else because she pays on time and he fears her. She clears roughly $300 a month. She reinvests almost none of it in the building, which was already falling apart when she took the lease, and which continues to fall apart at a pace the building seems to find personally satisfying. Her daughter Clara carries the coffee pot at breakfast. She is 12 and does this with the expression of someone who has been carrying a coffee pot since long before she had opinions about it. She refills your cup without asking. She does not make eye contact. She sets the pot down at the end of the table with a small controlled thud that means she is done now, and then she goes back to the kitchen, where the next pot is already heating. Of course, Mary didn't start in Leadville. She came through Abilene first, then Hays City, following the cattle contracts north and west the way everyone did, not chasing adventure, but chasing the ratio of men to available beds. A boom camp with 500 miners and 12 places to sleep was a business opportunity. Mary recognized this faster than most and acted on it faster than everyone. She arrived with a trunk, a cast-iron pot, and a zero-tolerance policy for men who didn't understand what the word no meant when spoken by a woman holding a ladle. Mary doesn't argue. She doesn't explain. A man who violates the dining room fighting rule pays a $1 surcharge added to his weekly tab, no discussion. She writes it down in the ledger in front of him and he watches her do it and there is nothing he can say. The ledger just sits there on the counter, open, blotted and creased, absorbing consequences. She's not the only widow running a boarding house in the territories. There's a woman named Hattie Cole in Cheyenne who runs 32 beds and keeps a brass bell by the front door instead of a board. There's Ada Sims in Bodie who put a second outhouse in last spring and now charges an extra nickel for the use of it. There's a widow in Tombstone who never gave her name to the county at all and runs the books under a man's name she invented and pays the merchant in coin from a leather pouch she sleeps with under her pillow. None of them call this an arrangement. They just run the bell, the outhouse, the leather pouch. By the end of your first week, you've memorized the rules without reading the board. You know breakfast ends when Mary covers the pot. You know the front door locks at 10. You know Clara's coffee thud means the morning is officially over and whatever you haven't resolved in your interior life is going to have to wait until tomorrow. The rules are not complicated. They are just consistent. And out here, consistent is rare enough to feel like luxury. You ask Mary, on Friday afternoon between the dinner clear and the supper preparation, about reducing your weekly rate. You are a regular now. You have been here 3 months. You pay in advance every Monday and you have never once been late. Mary listens to your case with the polite attention of a woman who has heard this case before and will hear it again. She does not lower the rate. She offers you, instead, first choice of bed slot on Mondays, which is the practical equivalent of a small raise, and you take it. First choice of slot means the bed nearest the east wall, which is farthest from the window that doesn't fully latch and closest to the stovepipe that runs up through the ceiling. In winter, this matters considerably. In summer, it means you sleep next to a radiant iron column that has spent all day storing opinions about temperature and is now releasing them directly onto your face. You take the slot anyway. It is still better than the middle bunk. The middle bunk is where you spent your first 2 weeks. The middle bunk is the Bermuda Triangle of the sleeping arrangement. Too far from the stovepipe for warmth, too close to the man below you for dignity, and directly at nose level with the wall seam that the rags don't quite cover. The rags are a gesture. They acknowledge the gap without solving it. In February, the draft through that seam could extinguish a candle held 2 feet away, which you know because a man named Delbert tested this on his first night and then packed his rags tighter and never tried anything again. Mary keeps a ledger, and the ledger is not friendly to ambiguity. Every Monday, your name, your slot number, and your paid amount are entered in a column alongside 39 other names. The ledger is a plain, dense, quietly unimpressed object. It doesn't care that you've been here 3 months. It doesn't care about loyalty, goodwill, or the fact that you once helped carry a sick man's gear up from the street when nobody else would. The ledger has a concept of outstanding balance, and that concept is very well developed. You are current, you stay current, this is the negotiation. Mary, before answering you, weighs 3 things: your shift record, your bed slot rotation, and your conduct toward the coffer at the corner of the table, the third of which carries more weight than the first 2 combined, because she has run this place long enough to know which of the inputs predicts a man's next 6 months. The ledger has a 4th column for that. It is titled, in her own hand, Disposition, and the entries are 1 word each. She keeps the pencil sharpened with a pocket knife between sentences. The pencil is older than the ledger, and the knife is older than the pencil. What you actually received from the Friday conversation is not nothing. First slot Mondays means you're choosing before the week's rotation resets, which means you're choosing before the man on the incoming night shift gets in from the 4 a.m. crew and drops his boots on the floor with the energy of someone who has not slept in 31 hours and has strong feelings about mattress position. His name is Garrett. Garrett's boots announce him from 2 rooms away. Garrett settles into a bunk like a tree falling. First slot Mondays means you are asleep before Garrett arrives. This is, genuinely, the better outcome. Mary watches you process this. She is already moving toward the kitchen. The negotiation is complete. There's a brief moment where you consider pressing further, pointing out that the wall gap has gotten wider since October, that the mattress in slot 4 has developed a structural valley in the middle that tips you toward the edge regardless of how you position yourself, that the wash basin situation on Tuesday mornings is, at this point, more of a ceremony than a hygiene practice. You don't say any of this. Mary already knows. The rate stays where it is because the rate reflects what this bed slot costs, not what it's worth. Send. Those are different numbers. You pocket the Monday priority and head back toward the bunk room. Garrett's boots are already by the door. He's not supposed to be back until 6. You arrive in Virginia City with a Cantonese surname, and you discover, within the first hour, that the boarding houses on the main street will not rent to you. You walk 3 blocks east. You find what the men inside it call a Fong house, which is a Chinese boarding establishment that operates parallel to the white one and that runs on its own ledger. The rate is the same. The food is different. The rules are different. The clientele is yours, and the door does not require explanation. The building looks roughly like every other frame structure in camp: green lumber, gaps at the seams. Inside it is organized differently. The sleeping room is subdivided by hanging cloth panels into narrow berths, each wide enough for 1 man and his bundle. The square footage is closer to a coffin and the neighbor can hear you breathe. A man named Wei, who manages the berths with the authority of someone who has memorized every occupant's shift schedule, points you to a slot near the back wall. He does not show you twice. The kitchen produces rice in the morning, which you have not tasted in months, and the experience of eating something that isn't salt pork and cornbread registers somewhere between relief and small grief. There's a communal pot of congee before dawn, there are pickled vegetables, there is tea brewed correctly and not reheated until it becomes sediment with ambitions. The men eat in shifts, same as the main street house. There's no menu here either, but the absence of menu tastes warm, salty, and unexpectedly home-shaped. The Fong house operates in the part of town the white directories don't map. In larger camps, this section has a name: Chinatown in Virginia City, a separate ward in Deadwood, a distinct block in Tombstone, and it contains its own economy. Laundrymen, cooks, herbalists, gambling dens running fan-tan and mahjong, small import merchants who carry dried mushrooms and salted fish, and things you cannot explain to anyone outside the neighborhood. By 1880, there are roughly 7,500 Chinese laundry operations across the West. The infrastructure exists because the alternative was nothing. You pay the same 50 cents that buys floor space 3 blocks over, and what you get instead is a berth with a cloth wall and a man named Wei who will tell you exactly when your slot ends. The sheets are washed more often than at Mary Murphy's, The protection here is informal and complete. The Tong, the mutual aid society operating out of a back room, handles disputes, extends small loans, and mediates between residents and the camp's less theoretical forms of hostility. The Tong's treasurer, a precise man who goes by limb and keeps his accounts in a ledger the size of a hymnal, does not raise his voice. He doesn't need to. The ledger does the talking, and the ledger has never lost an argument. Of course, the Fong house has the same baseline conditions as every other establishment in camp. The bedbugs don't observe jurisdictional boundaries. The kerosene lamp deposits its thin, oily film on lungs regardless of which block it's burning on. The gaps in the wall let in the same Nevada wind and the same Nevada cold. 3 blocks of distance from the main street solves the problem it solves and leaves everything else exactly where it found it. What it does solve is the morning. You wake up before your shift, eat rice instead of cornbread, drink tea instead of something that once wanted to be coffee, and walk out into a camp that will spend the rest of the day pretending you're not there. You know where the door is. You know which ledger your name is in. That's enough for a Tuesday in Virginia City. You arrive at the bed at 10 o'clock, and the night shift man is still in it. He is supposed to be out by 10. He has overslept, possibly because the mine ran a double shift the previous day, possibly because he was drinking, and possibly because he is exhausted in the specific way that 12-hour shifts in a Comstock drift produce. You stand at the foot of the bed. He does not move. The proprietress is downstairs. You decide what kind of man you are going to be about this. The bed itself is not worth fighting over. You know this. It is a wood frame cot with a corn husk mattress and a sheet that was last laundered sometime in a previous geological era. The sheet has a dent in it where his head was, and before that, your head, and before that, a man named Callum who left for the Carson River diggings 3 weeks ago and whose permanent impression appears to remain. The mattress has opinions about your lower back. They are not positive opinions. Your options sit in front of you on the cot like 3 coins, dull, uneven, and individually unappealing. You could shake him. A lot of men shake. A Norwegian named Petter on the far side of the room shook a man last Tuesday, and the man swung blind and caught Petter across the cheek with the back of a fist that had been clenched around a boot. Petter's eye went yellow for 10 days. The boot was still warm. This is relevant information when deciding whether to shake. The alternative is the proprietress. Her name is Margaret Holt. She is 41 years old, and she has operated this establishment since her husband went into a Comstock shaft in 1864 and declined to come back out. She runs the place with the administrative efficiency of someone who has resolved approximately 900 of these disputes and found them all equally tedious. She keeps a short wooden dowel behind the kitchen door. It is not for cooking. She will use the dowel, descend on the room, and the sleeping man will be vertical within 45 seconds. She has done this before. She will do it again. The dowel has a groove worn into one end from repeated deployment and looks like it has developed a professional attitude about the whole situation. You call for Mrs. Holt. She arrives, uses the dowel against the bed frame once. Not the man, the frame. She's not a monster. And the night shift man surfaces from whatever depth he was in, blinks at the ceiling, says something that is probably a word, and moves. He takes the blanket with him. This is a separate dispute and a smaller one, and you let it go because you are tired in the way that 10 hours in a stamp mill produces, which is a kind of tired that does not leave room for blanket negotiations. You climb in. The sheets are warm. Not your warm, his warm. The dent where his head was is still present, and your head settles into it, because the mattress has lost the structural resistance to offer you anything else. The corn husks shift. Something in the mattress moves in a manner that is not corn husks. You make a note of this and file it under baseline conditions, because that is what you do out here, and then you close your eyes. The kerosene lamp across the room is still burning. Someone is snoring in 3 to 4 time. The piano from the saloon 2 doors down is playing something that might be a waltz if the pianist had ever encountered a waltz personally, which seems unlikely. You have been asleep before the next chorus. You haven't decided if that's impressive or just what happens when a human body hits its limit and stops asking permission. You sit down for dinner at noon, and the proprietress brings to the table a single enamel basin containing, that day, boiled beans with salt pork and a quarter onion sliced into it. The basin is set in the center of the table. 12 men reach for it simultaneously with their tin spoons. There is no discussion of portion size. There is no discussion of who goes first. The dish empties at the rate it empties, and the slowest man at the table eats less than the fastest. The menu is a fixed, narrow, and faintly punitive document written somewhere a long time ago by a person who never had to eat from it. Not today's menu. There is no today's menu. There is the menu, which has been the menu since the house opened, and which will remain the menu until the house closes or the salt pork supply fails, whichever comes first. Beans. Salt beef or salt pork, depending on which arrived by wagon that week. Boiled potatoes when available. Turnips when the potatoes aren't. Cornbread, which is mostly a structural element. Less food, more platform for the other food to rest against. It all arrives at once, in shared vessels, and it all disappears in approximately 4 minutes. The cornbread is made before dawn. By noon it has the texture of something that was once soft and has since reconsidered. A man named Clarence, who has the spot across from you and hasn't spoken to anyone in 6 days, eats his portion in 3 bites and stares at the middle distance while you're still on your first. You don't know what Clarence is thinking. Based on available evidence, nobody does. Fresh vegetables are not present. Fresh vegetables have not been present in some time. Your gums have begun to feel loose in a way you've decided not to think about too carefully. This is subclinical scurvy, though nobody at the table has that phrase. What everyone has is a general sense that something is slightly wrong, attributed vaguely to the altitude, the workload, or the personal failings of whoever's running the kitchen. The canned goods on the shelf behind you would theoretically help, except the cans are sealed with lead solder, which is doing something to you that won't have a name for another 30 years. The tin of peaches has a small dent in it. You eat it anyway. Everyone does. Coffee arrives in a tin pot that has been on the stove since before you woke up. It was brewed sometime around 5 in the morning, reheated twice, and is now approximately half liquid and half sediment, the bottom third of your cup requiring a spoon to navigate rather than drink. It tastes the way an iron nail would taste if you left it in hot water for 7 hours and then charged a man a nickel for the privilege. You drink all of it. The alternative is water, and the water here has a reputation. There is no second course. There is no first course, technically. The basin is the course. Dinner runs about 12 minutes on a busy day. Eating quickly isn't considered rude. Eating slowly is considered a kind of optimism that the frontier has no time for. You finish what you can, stand up, nod at no one in particular, and step back outside into air that smells like horses and proximity. What you don't get is a choice. Not about what's served, not about when it's served, not about how much. The proprietress sets the time, noon, sharp, not noonish, and if your shift runs long or your foreman keeps you, the basin has already been cleared by the time you sit down. Margaret Holt, who runs this particular establishment, keeps a clean table in the sense that it is clear of food by 12:15. She doesn't wait. The basin doesn't wait. Clarence somehow is always done before you arrive. You notice around the 8th week that your gums bleed when you bite into the cornbread. The cornbread is not the cause. The cause is the absence of any green vegetable in your diet since the last fresh delivery from California, which arrived in March, and it is now nearly June. This is the early form of scurvy. The proprietress, which has seen it before in long-term residence, will offer you for an additional 10 cents on the weekly rate the option of a small dish of canned tomatoes on Wednesdays. The canned tomatoes arrive in a tin sealed with lead solder along the seam. You eat them. They are orange, soft, faintly metallic, and taste of something you can't quite name. Nobody can name it. The name won't be available for another 30 years. In the meantime, the metal is doing what metal does when it dissolves slowly into acidic fruit, which is make its way into your blood, your joints, your thinking, in quantities small enough to be invisible and large enough to matter. You eat the tomatoes anyway. They're the only thing on the table that isn't beige. The canned goods deserve their own paragraph because your boarding house runs on them. The cans arrive by freight wagon from the railhead, dented, sometimes swollen, labelled with hand-stenciled names like peaches or beef or tomatoes, as though naming the thing inside were the same as verifying it. A swollen can is a small, round, and faintly menacing object. The proprietress has a system. She sets those aside and serves them on Fridays. You eat them on Fridays. You do not ask about the system. Nellie Garner, who runs the establishment 2 lots down the road, has a different policy. Nellie pries the swollen cans open outside, arm extended, face turned. She once described the experience as similar to being personally addressed by the can. The smell is immediate, assertive, the kind of smell that selects a person and walks directly toward them. Nellie dumps those ones. She is, by local standards, a progressive. The tomatoes on Wednesdays do slow the gum bleeding. Not stop it, slow it. By week 12, you've developed a faint looseness in two of your back teeth, which you interpret as a mining accident consequence and not a nutritional one, because the concept of nutritional consequence is not yet something the medical establishment in Tombstone is spending a lot of time on. The doctor in town, when you find him, checks your pulse, looks at your tongue, and prescribes beef tea and fresh air. The beef tea is available at 30 cents a cup from the boarding house kitchen, where it will be brewed from the same boiled-down salt beef you had at noon. The fresh air is available for free, and it smells like the outhouse. You are losing, slowly and politely, in several directions at once. The lice are a low-grade constant. The gums are a new entrant. The joints, a little stiff in the mornings, a little more than last month, are not yet identified as a category. You eat the Wednesday tomatoes with the gratitude of someone who doesn't know what's in them. The tin sits on the table like a small medical intervention from a company that also has no idea what's in them. And yet the canned tomatoes are, in the frontier boarding house economy, a luxury item. The men who arrived before the last California delivery and stayed are further along the same curve. One of them, a driller named Aldous something, has been at the table for 4 months. His gums are visibly darker. He eats the Wednesday tomatoes faster than anyone else, not out of hunger. More like urgency. Like a man who has started to understand something about his body without having the word for it. He doesn't say anything. He finishes the tomatoes. He scrapes the tin. You eat, on Tuesday and Thursday evenings, canned beef from a tin sealed with lead solder around the rim. The lead solder dissolves slowly into the meat over the months the tin has been sitting on the general store shelf. You eat the meat. You eat it the next week, and the week after that. Within a year, your hands will sometimes tremble for reasons you cannot place, and you will develop a slow headache that does not respond to whiskey. The cause of these symptoms is not yet known to medicine. The tin itself looks fine. That's the problem. A swollen tin at least argues for caution. Nellie Garner, 2 lots down, throws those out, which puts her in a small and arguably eccentric minority. But a lead-soldered tin that is perfectly flush, perfectly sealed, sitting upright on the shelf with complete confidence, that tin has no visible opinion about what it's been doing to the meat inside it for the past 4 months. It just sits there, quietly, poisoning at a pace that is professionally patient. Chronic low-level lead poisoning works on you the way weather works on a fence post, slow, steady, and quietly thorough. Meanwhile, the canned beef is also just not very good. This feels worth noting. It arrives in a grey-brown state that doesn't improve with heat. Gus Henriksen, who has the bunk above yours and who worked a cannery in Baltimore before he came west, identifies the smell as what he calls processing enthusiasm, which means the beef was packed too fast, in too much heat, with too little attention to which parts of the cow were included. You eat it anyway. The cornbread absorbs most of the flavour, which is a service the cornbread performs quietly and without complaint, like the best kind of employee. The alternative is to buy from the general store yourself and cook at the house stove, which requires a negotiation with the proprietor about kitchen hours that has historically ended badly for the person requesting kitchen hours. Or you eat at the Chinese cook tent 2 blocks down, where the food is better by a margin that is frankly embarrassing to the boarding house kitchen, and where nobody asks your name or your business, and where the tea arrives hot and stays hot and has never once tasted of boiled iron. You go there sometimes. You don't mention it at the table. The canned peaches on Sunday are different. The canned peaches are sealed the same way, with the same solder, sitting on the same shelf. But the peaches taste like something a person chose on purpose. You eat them slowly, which is unusual. The syrup is the colour of late afternoon. For approximately 4 minutes on a Sunday, Leadville is somewhere a man might have intended to arrive. Then the tin is empty. Monday is coming. The beef tin is already on the shelf, sitting there with the bland, civic patience of a tin that has not yet been asked to explain itself. You sit down to dinner on Wednesday across from a man named Will, who has been coughing for 3 weeks now. The coughing is dry and persistent, and it produces, occasionally, a small spotted handkerchief that Will folds back into his coat pocket without comment. The medical term for what Will has is pulmonary tuberculosis. The street term is consumption. He shares your table, your serving basin, your wash basin, and the tin ladle in the shared drinking pail. Nobody has asked him to eat elsewhere. Consumption doesn't announce itself dramatically on the frontier. It doesn't knock you flat in a single afternoon. It removes you slowly, by increment, a little more cough, a little more weight gone from your face, a little more yellow around the eyes, until one Wednesday you're at the table and the following Wednesday your bunk slot is back on offer. Will is at the stage where he still works his shift. This is considered fine. This is considered, by the standards of the Leadville boarding house, a private matter. The air in this room is heavy, oily, and faintly inhabited. It's roughly 14 feet across and holds 12 men at dinner, one kerosene lamp, and the accumulated respiratory output of a full working day underground. The lamp deposits a thin, oily film on the walls, the ceiling, and the inside of your lungs. The men nearest the stove sweat through their shirts by the second course. The men nearest the door get a draft from the gap in the wall that the newspaper stuffing has, once again, declined to cover. There is no middle temperature. There is hot, and there is a cold rectangle near the door that a man named Fletcher has been quietly negotiating around for 6 weeks. The meal is beans and salt beef and cornbread, which is mostly a structural element. There's no menu, there's no choice. There's what Mary Murphy sets on the table at 5:30, and then there's the sound of 12 men eating it without ceremony. The beans are good actually, she soaks them overnight, which is more than the last house did. You eat both because the alternative is the coffee, which has been on the iron pot since before dawn and is now, at the evening reheating, approximately half sediment and half the memory of coffee. Across the table, Will coughs again. The man beside him, a driller named Albrecht, who arrived from Stuttgart 2 years ago and still looks faintly surprised by everything, shifts his tin cup 2 inches to the left. That's the extent of it. That's the whole conversation. Doctors in 1882 can tell you what consumption looks like in the final stages. They cannot yet reliably tell you how it travels. Germ theory exists, technically, but it hasn't finished its journey from European medical journals to a 12-man table in Leadville, Colorado. The ladle goes around. It does not pause to consider its career. You use it. Colorado Springs, 60 miles south, has been marketing itself to tuberculosis patients since 1871. Dry air, clean altitude, guaranteed relief. The patients arrive on the train. Some of them recover. Some of them get rooms in boarding houses, not entirely unlike this one, and recover partway, and then spread the disease to the men they share a wash basin with. Colorado Springs is, in its way, the original wellness retreat. Except the guests gave their condition to the neighbours and the neighbours didn't leave reviews. Will folds the handkerchief back into his pocket. He picks up his fork. He eats the rest of his beans without drama, which is the most frontier thing a man can do. Carry a mortal illness in his coat pocket, use the communal ladle, and decline to make it everyone else's problem. You go to the water pail at 6 in the morning, and you dip the shared tin ladle, and you wonder, briefly, whether the water in this pail came from the creek or from the well. Every man here pretends not to know 3 things at the pail: where the water came from, who carried it, and what passed it on the way. The creek runs past the back of the privies of the 3 boarding houses upstream of yours. The well is 50 feet from your own boarding house outhouse. Nobody tests either of them. Nobody treats either of them. You drink, you move on, because the bell has rung, and the shift starts in an hour. 50 feet is about the length of the dining room, the sleeping room, the kitchen, and the narrow passage between them combined, which means the ground you walk on every day and the water you drink every morning are involved in an ongoing conversation that you are not part of and would not enjoy if you were. Cholera killed thousands across Missouri River towns in 1866. Typhoid struck Tombstone in 1882. Nobody named the water. The water didn't volunteer. The wash basin is a wooden bucket, small, splintery, and quietly accumulating. Every morning, Mrs. Greer, who handles the morning schedule with the focused energy of someone diffusing something, fills it once from the same pail you just drank from, sets it on the bench outside the sleeping room door, and lays a cloth beside it. You use the cloth. So does Albrecht from Stuttgart. So does every man down the row. The water darkens, the cloth stiffens. Nobody empties the basin until the evening, at which point it has achieved a density of shared humanity that a scientist with the right equipment could study for weeks. You wash your face in it anyway. You have a shift. The pail itself came in on a cart 3 days ago and has been refilled twice since by the boy who does the pail work. His name is Danny. Danny is 11. Danny gets the water from wherever the water is. 10. He doesn't ask questions about the creek or the well because he's 11, and also because nobody is paying him to ask questions. They're paying him, loosely speaking, to move water from one place to another without spilling most of it. He spills some of it. The pail is still 3/4 full. That's fine. That's the system. The coffee doesn't help. It's brewed before dawn in an iron pot and reheated all morning until it's half sediment, last Tuesday's grounds boiled into next Wednesday's resolve. You drink it hot. You drink it warm. By 8 o'clock, if you're still in the building, you drink it at room temperature and stop thinking about what room temperature means in a space where 20 men have been sleeping and breathing since midnight. The coffee has a colour, not a good colour, not a bad colour, just a colour that suggests the pot has given up trying to be coffee and is now simply hot and present. The math is uncomfortable. In boom period camps, a single boarding house outhouse served 40 men, one pit. Pumped out rarely, which in practice meant never until the smell made a compelling structural argument for intervention. The outhouse sits at the back of the lot. The well sits at the front. Between them is the same soil that's been tamped down by 40 pairs of boots twice a day for the last 8 months. The soil is doing its part. You can't fault the soil for that. You can fault the geography, except nobody who staked the lot was thinking about hydrology. They were thinking about how quickly they could get 40 men fed and vertical, and walking toward a mine. You don't get sick today. That's worth something. Tomorrow is a separate question. You walk after dinner 15 feet next door to the saloon, because the saloon is 15 feet next door, and you sit down at a faro layout run by a professional dealer in a clean shirt. The game uses a board of 13 cards arranged in 2 rows on green felt, and the rules are simple enough to learn in a single hand. You play for an hour. You will play tomorrow night and the night after that, until your weekly wage is concentrated in a smaller stack than it was when you started. Faro is the preferred game of the frontier, and it has a reputation for honesty that is not entirely deserved. The dealer draws cards from a dealing box, a brass mechanism about the size of a large man's fist, and players bet on which card rank will win or lose on each pull. The house edge is thin, genuinely thin, compared to most games of the era. This is why you keep coming back. The math almost makes sense. Almost. The faro layout is not a game. It's a slow, patient and well-lit payday with mathematics. The dealer's name is something like Franklin, though nobody asks. Franklin has been at this table since before you arrived in town and will be at this table after you leave, which he knows and you don't. He is calm, clean-shaven, and professionally uninterested. He wears a brocade vest and keeps his nails clean, which in a mining camp is basically a declaration of professional identity. He handles the dealing box with the practiced calm of someone who has watched 1,000 men convince themselves they're about to turn it around. He has not once looked surprised. The other games are available too. Monte in the corner, which the Mexican and Mexican-adjacent population tends toward. The cards smaller and the stakes looser. Chuck-a-luck near the bar, which involves a cage of 3 dice and odds that should disqualify it from being called a game at all. Poker at the back table, where the men with grudges sit. You can hear the poker table from across the room because men playing poker with grudges cannot stay quiet about it. Now, the saloon itself is doing several things at once. It's a drinking establishment. It's a gambling hall. It's the room where mail sometimes gets sorted. It's where you hear news from the previous town, which is 3 weeks old and probably wrong. It's the only place with a piano which a man named Gerald plays with real commitment and no particular skill. Gerald has been playing the same 7 songs in rotation since March. You know all of them now. You know them in the way you know a sound that lives inside your walls. The drinks are whiskey, mostly, sold by the glass for a dime or 2 bits, depending on what the town's supply situation is that week. The whiskey is not regulated in any direction that benefits you. Frontier whiskey ran on a spectrum from adequately distilled grain spirits to what contemporary drinkers described as a mixture of raw alcohol, tobacco, and red pepper, assembled to approximate the sensation of actual whiskey without the inconvenience of making any. Some establishments added a small amount of strychnine, which was understood to produce a warming sensation. This is perhaps the most alarming sentence in this entire story, and it is stated in contemporary sources without apparent alarm. You drink 1 glass because you're watching your steak. The man to your left drinks 4. which you watch with the specific anxiety of someone sitting at the same table. Franklin deals. A 6 wins. A jack loses. Your copper token, which means you've bet against the card, earns you back what you put down. And the same again. You're up 40 cents. This is the moment the game was designed around. The thing about faro is the case keep. The case keep is a small abacus-style board on a wire rack that tracks which cards have already been dealt, so you know what's left in the box. It sounds like information. It feels like information. A man named Calhoun, 3 seats down, has been consulting his case keep notes on a folded piece of paper for the last 20 minutes, adjusting his bets with the focused attention of someone who believes he has found the pattern. Calhoun is down $1.60. The pattern has not yet revealed its cooperative side. By 10 o'clock, you've lost the 40 cents you gained and an additional 30 on top of it. You stand up. Franklin does not watch you leave, which is somehow worse than if he had. Outside, the street smells like the street always smells. Manure, kerosene, damp wood, and the boarding house is exactly 15 feet away, which is the same distance it was when you left it. You go to the general store on Saturday and you buy a small brown glass bottle of laudanum, which is opium dissolved in alcohol, which is sold without a prescription for 15 cents per bottle. You take it when the cough wakes you, or when the backache from a 12-hour shift will not let you sleep, or when the homesickness, though you would not use that word for it, becomes the loudest thing in the room. The recommended starting dose, as printed in the United States Dispensatory of 1880, is 25 drops. Most men in this boarding house take 40, some take 70. The label gives no dosing instructions. You learn the dose by trial. 15 cents is significant. It's 2 cups of coffee from the woman who runs the lunch counter on the east end of Maine. It's a third of your floor space rental for the night. But the laudanum is cheaper than the whiskey, lasts longer, and doesn't argue with you the way the whiskey does. The bottle fits in your coat pocket. The bottle doesn't judge. The bottle is, in its quiet way, the most reliable relationship you have in this town. The rest of that shelf is a tidy, hopeful, and faintly suspicious row of bottles. Soothing syrups for children, which are also laudanum. Nervine tonic for women, also laudanum. Doctor. Hammond's sarsaparilla compound, which promises to cure kidney complaints and lingering debility, which is laudanum with sarsaparilla roots stirred in so the label has something to say. The patent medicine industry in 1880 is basically a pharmacist handing you the same bottle 12 different times with 12 different names, and the names are doing more work than the medicine. You are not self-medicating. You are following the recommended treatment. The storekeep, a thin man named Orville who parts his hair with the dedication of someone who has decided this detail will distinguish him, slides the bottle across the counter without comment. He stocks 6 varieties. He reorders twice a month. The shelf never empties. This is how you know you are not alone in this. The cough that wakes you at 2 in the morning might be nothing. Dry air, dust from the shaft. The constant ambient soot from the kerosene lamp depositing a thin, dark film on your lungs as though they are the inside of a poorly ventilated chimney. Or the cough might be something. Consumption moved through mining camps the way fire moved through wooden towns, quietly at first, then all at once. Virginia City, Leadville, Tombstone. The man in the bunk below you develops a rattling quality to his breathing sometime in March. By May, his bunk slot is available again. You don't ask. The laudanum doesn't ask either. There are other things you could reach for. The barber on Cedar Street will perform minor surgery with instruments he wipes on his apron between customers, which is not nothing in the sense that he has wiped them. A doctor exists in town, a man named Dr. Pruitt, who trained somewhere unspecified and whose hands shake less than you'd expect given the available evidence. Pruitt charges $2 for a visit, which is a full day's wages, and will tell you to rest, drink clean water, and avoid excitement. The rest is not possible. The clean water situation is what it is. The excitement is structural, so you keep the bottle. You keep it at the top of your pack, under the second shirt, where it doesn't rattle when you move. A man named Deacon Howell, not an actual deacon, just a former Sunday school teacher from Ohio who carries the nickname like luggage he can't quite set down, keeps his on the windowsill. He takes a half measure before bed and says it helps him remember that tomorrow is a new circumstance. He's not wrong. It does help with that. The laudanum pulls you horizontal when nothing else can. The boarding house around you continues. The snoring, the settling of green lumber, the man near the door who talks in his sleep about a woman named Agnes, with a specificity that suggests Agnes remains a live issue. The kerosene flame makes its small sound. Your boots are by the bed, not under your head tonight, because tonight you can afford a mattress slot. The corn husks shift when you move. The bed bugs are already present and working. And the laudanum takes the sharp edge off all of it, the cough, the back, the too loud nothing of being very far from anywhere you meant to end up. You sleep, if you sleep upstairs, with the awareness that the boarding house is built of green pine, lit by kerosene lamps, heated by a coal stove in the kitchen directly below your floorboards, and packed close against 3 other wooden structures on either side of the lot. Deadwood burned in September of 1879. Virginia City burned in 1875. The fire begins, in both cases, in a kitchen. You have a window. The latch on the window does not always work. You think about this at night. The latch is not a latch. It's a small, bent, faintly insulted nail on a swivel, performing the role of a latch with the thin, weary and uncomplaining patience of something that was never asked. The whole window frame swelled in August and dried in October, and neither event was good for the bent nail on a swivel. You've tested it 3 times since Thursday. It works twice. You decide that's a passing grade. The buildings on either side of you are, respectively, a dry goods store and a second boarding house with 22 men sleeping in 4-hour rotations, both a pine frame. Both were built in under a month by men who were planning to leave once the season turned. The dry goods store has a stove too. It also has a barrel of lamp oil. You know this because the proprietor, a man named Carver, told everyone at dinner last week the way people announce things they're proud of. You have not stopped thinking about the barrel since. Kerosene lamps produce a yellow, unsteady light that has a secondary function nobody advertises, which is depositing a thin, oily film on everything within 6 feet, including the ceiling beams, the curtain fabric if there is any, and the inside of your lungs over the course of a winter. The lamps get knocked over. That's not speculation. That's Tuesday. A man in the bunk below yours knocked one off the shelf, reaching for his boots at 4 a.m, and the whole room held its breath for the 2 seconds it took to confirm the flame had gone out. Nobody said anything. Everyone already understood the stakes. Now, the exits. There's a staircase. The staircase is 11 inches wide because the man who built it calculated for 1 person at a time, under calm conditions, carrying nothing. You are sharing this staircase with 15 other men who will all decide to use it simultaneously and in darkness. The door at the bottom opens inward, which is a design choice that falls somewhere between ambitious and vindictive. Past the door there is a short hallway. Past the hallway there is the kitchen, which is where the fire is. A bucket of water sits at the top of the stairs. Amos, who took the bunk nearest the window specifically for this reason and makes no secret of it, filled it himself last Sunday and considers this sufficient. The bucket is community property in the sense that everyone benefits from believing it exists. It holds about 3 gallons, which is enough to wet the floor in front of the stairs and create 1 additional hazard. Dead wood burns fast. Virginia City covered several blocks and the fire moved between buildings in the time it took men on the street to realize it wasn't a controlled burn. The gap between your wall and the dry goods store is 18 inches. You measured it. At 18 inches, a fire doesn't need to jump, it just leans. So you sleep upstairs with 1 eye on the bent nail and both boots already laced. Not because you are unusually cautious. Because you have done the math and the math has a preferred outcome, and it involves being outside before anyone else is on the stairs. Amos has the window, you have the calculation. Between the 2 of you, you've covered most of the exits. The 3rd man in your bunk rotation, who works nights and comes in at dawn, doesn't know about any of this. He climbs into still warm sheets and is asleep in 4 minutes. He has, in its way, the better arrangement. You hear, at 2 a.m, a knock at the front door of the boarding house, and you hear the proprietress descend the stairs to answer it, and you hear her open the door, and you hear several voices speaking quietly in the front hall. You do not get up. You do not get up because the men at the door are members of the local vigilance committee, and the vigilance committee is here to remove someone from his bed. You hope it is not the bed adjacent to yours. In the front hall, the voices stay low, the way men speak when they know the whole house is awake and listening. Boots shift on the boards. A lantern moves once across the gap under the door. The knock comes again. Softer this time, which is somehow worse. In the front hall, one of the men says something you can't quite make out. The proprietress says something back. Her voice is steady, which tells you she's done this before or has decided that composure is the safest available option. Both are plausible. She runs a 40-man house. She has made harder calls than this before breakfast. You hold very still. You keep your eyes partly open. You don't move your head. The man in the bunk opposite you, the one who came in at 9 and hasn't spoken to anyone in 4 days, is also very still. Harold, who sleeps against the far wall with his coat over his face regardless of temperature, has stopped snoring. The room is doing a collective impression of unconsciousness. It is not a convincing performance, but it's the only one available. The footsteps come up the stairs. There are 3 sets, deliberate, not rushing, which is the particular sound of men who feel they have time. One of them carries a lantern. You can see the light move under the door gap, slow and sweeping like something that's looking. The door opens. Nobody says your name. They say a different name, and someone 4 bunks down makes a sound that isn't quite a word, and there's a brief interval of shuffling and low voices, and then the footsteps go back down the stairs with 1 additional set added to the count. You don't hear a gunshot. That's actually the more common outcome. The vigilantes in most camp towns preferred compliance to spectacle, quieter, faster, less paperwork, which is to say, no paperwork at all, because there was never any paperwork. In the morning there will be a body on a crossbeam at the edge of town, or there won't be, and the man will simply not appear at the breakfast table, and nobody will ask the proprietress what happened, and she won't volunteer it. The empty bunk will be relet by sundown. The sheets will not be changed first. You pay your final week's rent on a Monday in October. You are leaving because the seam has played out, or because the railroad has reached the next camp over and the rates are better there, or because a letter has arrived from home and the letter requires a return. Mary hands you back the small deposit she has been holding, which is 60 cents in coin, and she shakes your hand, and she wishes you well, and she has done all of this approximately 600 times before. The 60 cents goes into your coat pocket next to the folded letter. Your kit takes about 4 minutes to pack, which is not a reflection on your efficiency so much as a reflection on your total number of possessions. A change of shirt, a razor, a small tin with a photograph inside, the photograph slightly buckled from having been stored in a damp coat through 2 winters. You pull your boots on. They have served as your pillow for the better part of 14 months, and they remember the shape of your head better than they remember your feet at this point. The room looks the same from the doorway as it did the morning you arrived, a grey, dim, unrepentant rectangle that has given up on impressing anyone, and a thin, tired, and faintly satisfied draft moving across the floorboards. The bunk already has a name attached to it, not a tag, not a sign, just an understanding. A man named Devereaux from the Tuesday shift has been waiting on your slot since September, and by the time you reach the bottom of the road he'll be climbing into your sheets. The sheets, grey from infrequent washing, will carry the dent of your head for about an hour before they carry the dent of his. This is the full extent of the memorial. Mary is already back in the kitchen. You can hear the iron pot going, which means the coffee from this morning is still going too, reheated for the 4th time, approaching the structural consistency of wet clay. A man at the far table is eating it without expression. He has the look of someone who has renegotiated his expectations down to nothing and found a strange peace there. You eat your last breakfast standing at the counter because the bench has been claimed. Salt pork, cornbread, which is mostly performing the role of cornbread rather than being it. The coffee, when Mary pours it, is half sediment and entirely serious. You drink it anyway because you are leaving and the road is long and the next place may not have even this. You've said goodbye before, to camps in Nevada that lasted 8 months and ended when the assay figures came back wrong. To a bunkhouse in Leadville where 3 men shared your bed in December because no one was willing to be the one sleeping against the wall with the gap in the boards. You've left more rooms than you can accurately count in the direction they were going, which is to say nowhere in particular. Mary stands in the doorway and watches you go. She has 41 men still inside and 6 more arriving Thursday, and a roof that has been threatening since August, and a single outhouse at the back of the lot that everyone treats as someone else's problem. She is not sentimental about your departure. She is, if anything, logistical about it. The slot will be filled, the 60 cents will be recollected, the pot will be reheated one more time. You walk out into the October street and the camp smells like it always has. Coal, smoke and animal, and something faintly metallic from the works up the hill that you have never been able to fully identify and have stopped trying. The piano from the saloon 2 doors down is going badly, and has been going since approximately 1863 and will continue going until the building burns, which is a question of when, not if. You don't look back. Not because it was bad exactly. It was what it was. A bunk, a basin, a meal before dawn, a roof that mostly held. And so here we are at the end of the frontier day, which was not, it turns out, particularly golden. You've done a great deal. You climbed into a bed that was still warm from the man who just left it. You ate salt pork before the sun came up. You drank coffee that was mostly sediment by the time you got to it. You used a wash basin that 20 men used before you, in sequence, without anyone emptying it. You slept in a building stuffed with newspaper where the walls had opinions about wind. Mary Murphy is already in the kitchen by the time you stand up. The iron pot is heating for the next round. The ledger is open on the counter. The bunk you just left has a name attached to it before your boots reach the door, and the sheet keeps the dent of your head for about an hour before it carries the dent of his. Take a moment, if you would, to appreciate your bed. Find the cool side of the pillow. The sheets are yours. They are cold because you put them on fresh, not because the previous occupant already took all the warmth. There is, somewhere nearby, running water that comes out of a wall on demand. There is a mattress that does not contain anything that was previously a cornfield. There is no reasonable chance of cholera before morning. Let your shoulders drop. Let the pillow take the weight of your head. Let the quiet settle into the room. The wash basin has already been emptied. The corn husks have stayed in the field. The piano 2 doors down has finally, mercifully, stopped. Sleep well.